Welcome to another episode of Tactical Tuesday with Modern Milsim. Through this podcast, we will bring you real-world tactics, techniques, and procedures that will enable you to succeed on the Milsim battlefield. It's time to make ready. Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of Tactical Tuesday with Modern Milsim. As always, I am your host, Craig White. Thank you for being here. As you probably noticed, I'm about an episode behind where I should be right about now. I took a vacation with my family to Washington, D.C., and then attended Third Coast Airsoft's Operation Iron Dagger at Government Training Institute near Barnwell, South Carolina. Iron Dagger is TCA's first attempt at conducting a continuous 24-hour operation. Because of its 24-hour format, Operation Iron Dagger brought new challenges, especially for the leadership of each side. The biggest challenge was troop sustainment and replenishment. As the event pushed into the 0330 to 0530 time period, many players simply hit a wall and left the field to rest. Making sure players paced themselves while staying in the fray was challenging to say the least. The good thing is that both factions wanted another 24-hour continuous operation. We'll see how that one goes when we get to it. One thing is for sure, the Government Training Institute is one of my favorite AOs. It is the only uranium hexafluoride processing facility in the world. It was shut down in the late 1970s by Jimmy Carter before it became operational. It has a good balance of outdoor and indoor areas of operations that appeal to most players. If you have not attended an event at Government Training Institute, I highly recommend that you do so. So on to the topic of this episode. Today we're going to talk about reconnaissance and security, as well as their importance in shaping the Milsim battlefield. So let's get to it. Army Field Manual 3-90 defines reconnaissance, also known as recce or recon, as operations undertaken to obtain, by visual observation or other detection methods, information about the activities and resources of an enemy or potential enemy, or to secure data concerning the meteorological, hydrographical, or geographical characteristics and the indigenous population of a particular area. Essentially, the primary mission of recon is to gather information about the enemy movements, and terrain pertinent to ongoing operations. Reconnaissance primarily relies on the human dynamic rather than technical means to gather information or intelligence. It is a focused collection effort that is performed before, during, and after other operations to provide information used in the intelligence preparation of the battlefield, as well as by the commander in order to formulate, confirm, or modify his course of action. Recon is effectively a commander's eyes and ears in the battlefield. Reconnaissance identifies and evaluates characteristics of terrain, enemy, and friendly obstacles to movement, and the disposition of enemy forces and civilian population so that the commander or OIC can maneuver his force freely and rapidly. Reconnaissance is also critical to protecting the unit and preserving combat power. It also keeps the unit free from contact as long as possible so that it can mass combat power to complete the mission or missions. In order to establish his forces to perform effective recon, the OIC's order must include the Reconnaissance Objective within the Area of Operations, or AO. The Reconnaissance Objective is a terrain feature, geographical area, or an enemy force about which the OIC wants to obtain additional information. The Reconnaissance Objective clarifies the intent of the reconnaissance effort by specifying the most important result to obtain from the reconnaissance. Every reconnaissance mission must specify a reconnaissance objective. The reconnaissance objective can be information about a specific geographical location, such as whether a specific area facilitates freedom of movement, a specific enemy activity to be confirmed or denied, or a specific enemy unit to be located and tracked. When the reconnaissance unit does not have enough time to complete all the tasks associated with the specific form of reconnaissance it is performing, its OIC focuses on the reconnaissance objective to guide him in setting priorities. The OIC of the parent unit may need to provide additional detailed instructions beyond the reconnaissance objective, such as the specific task he wants accomplished or the priority of task. He does this by issuing additional guidance to his troops or by specifying these instructions in his task to his subordinate units. For example, if the recon objective is to track a particular enemy unit, the additional guidance would be to conduct only the terrain recon necessary to find the enemy unit in question, to track it, and to further develop the situation. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind when we discuss reconnaissance concepts is that they generally apply to all levels of Milsim, from the tactical to the operational, and in some cases, the strategic. They apply to individual players acting as part of a spotter-observer team or a sniper-observer team, also known as SNOT. They also apply to a squad or platoon tasked with conducting recon patrols. At the operational level, recon concepts apply to larger elements conducting recon on a large objective prior to friendly attack to seize it. Essentially, these concepts, like most of the concepts discussed in this podcast, can be scaled up to meet the tactical or operational needs of the units conducting them. Now, reconnaissance is based on 7 basic fundamentals. The first is to ensure continuous reconnaissance. Effective recon is continuous. The OIC conducts recon before, during, and after all operations. Before an operation, recon focuses on filling gaps in the information about the enemy and the terrain. For Milsim purposes, this is accomplished by walking the AO the day or morning before StartX. During the op, recon focuses on providing the OIC with updated information that verifies the enemy's composition, disposition, and intentions as the battle progresses. This allows the OIC to verify which course of action the enemy is actually using and to determine whether his plan is still valid based on the actual events in the AO. After the operation, reconnaissance focuses on maintaining contact with the enemy to determine his next move and collecting information necessary for planning subsequent operations. This aspect of recon does not typically apply to Milsim. This is because each event is typically a standalone operation at different locations. However, the recon unit can continue to gather information regarding the AO that can be used to further refine battle plans for operations at that same AO. The second one is do not keep reconnaissance assets in reserve. Recon does not do the OIC any good if it is kept in reserve. By their size and nature, recon assets are not typically suited for quick reaction force or reserve duties. When committed, reconnaissance assets use all their resources to accomplish the mission, which is to provide information to the OIC. That being said, the OIC does not commit all of his recon assets all the time. Instead, he uses those assets based on their capabilities to provide maximum coverage needed to provide the OIC with the intelligence and information he seeks as dictated by the recon objective. At times, this requires the OIC to withhold or position reconnaissance assets to ensure that they are available at critical times and places and not committed elsewhere. Third, orient on the reconnaissance objective. The recon unit commander uses the reconnaissance objective to focus his unit's reconnaissance efforts. Leaders of subordinate reconnaissance elements remain focused on achieving this objective regardless of what their forces encounter during the mission. When time, limitations of unit capabilities, or enemy action prevents a unit from accomplishing all the tasks normally associated with a particular form of reconnaissance, the unit commander uses the reconnaissance objective to focus the reconnaissance effort. Fourth, report information rapidly and accurately. It does not matter how fast a recon unit reports information if it is not accurate. Inaccurate information will degrade the OIC's situational awareness and will likely lead him to form flawed decisions that detract from the unit's objective. Similarly, providing accurate information in an untimely manner is likewise of little use. Providing accurate information untimely results in a shift of initiative to the enemy and allow him to get inside the OIC's OODA loop. The longer it takes to get accurate information to the OIC, the less value it has to him. Reconnaissance units must report exactly what they see and, if appropriate, what they do not see. Seemingly unimportant information may be extremely important when combined with other information. Negative reports are as important as reports of enemy activity. Failure to report tells the OIC nothing. By the same token, recon elements should never distort, assume, or exaggerate. Such distortions, assumptions, and exaggerations carry up the chain of command, will likely result in flawed decisions by the recon elements OIC and above. Fifth, maintain freedom of maneuver. Reconnaissance assets must retain battlefield mobility to successfully complete their missions. If these assets are decisively engaged, reconnaissance stops and the battle for survival begins. Reconnaissance assets must have a clear engagement criteria that support the maneuver commander's intent. They must employ proper movement and reconnaissance techniques, including the use of overwatching fires, to allow them to avoid decisive engagements with the enemy and to break contact as necessary. Initiative and knowledge of both the terrain and the enemy reduce the likelihood of decisive engagement and help maintain freedom of maneuver. Finally, the recon element can hopefully avoid being decisively engaged by using the minimal amount of contact necessary to achieve the recon objective. Why use an entire platoon to maintain contact with the enemy when a squad or fire team can more effectively do so in a manner that minimizes actual enemy contact. Before initial contact, the reconnaissance unit adopts a combat formation designed to gain contact with the smallest possible friendly element. This provides the unit with the maximum opportunity for maneuver and enables it to avoid having the entire unit become decisively engaged. Using indirect fires to provide suppression and obscuration, as well as destroying point targets, is a method reconnaissance assets use to retain their freedom of maneuver. Sixth, gain and maintain enemy contact. Once a unit conducting reconnaissance gains contact with the enemy, it maintains that contact unless the OIC directing the reconnaissance orders otherwise, or the survival of the unit is at risk. This does not mean that individual scout and reconnaissance teams cannot break contact with the enemy. The OIC of the unit conducting reconnaissance is responsible for maintaining contact using all available resources. That contact can range from surveillance to close combat. Surveillance, combined with stealth, is often sufficient to maintain contact and is the preferred method of maintaining contact with the enemy. Units conducting reconnaissance avoid combat unless it is necessary to gain essential information, in which case the units use fire and maneuver to maintain contact while avoiding decisive engagement. Seventh, develop the situation rapidly. When a reconnaissance asset encounters an enemy force or an obstacle, it must quickly determine the threat it faces. For an enemy force, it must determine the enemy's composition, disposition, activity, and movement, and assess the implications of that information. For an obstacle, it must determine the type and extent of the obstacle and whether it is covered by fire. Obstacles can provide the attacker with information concerning the location of enemy forces, weapon capabilities, and the organization of fires. At the battalion level and below, the responsibility for conducting reconnaissance does not reside solely with specially organized units. Every unit has an implied mission to report information about the terrain, civilian activities, and friendly and enemy dispositions, regardless of its battlefield location and primary function. In addition, and at lower echelons, units will likely employ small surveillance and observation teams or sniper observation teams to gather intelligence and information for the parent unit's OIC. Smaller units will often employ reconnaissance patrols to gather information. Listen to episode 11 of this podcast for more information on that subject. In addition to ground assets, OICs can also rely on aerial surveillance, including the use of drones and other air assets. So now that we have discussed the fundamentals of reconnaissance, let's talk about the four forms or types of recon. The four forms of reconnaissance are route, zone, area, and reconnaissance in force. Route reconnaissance is a form of reconnaissance that focuses along a specific line of communication, such as a road, railway, or cross-country mobility corridor. It provides new or updated information on the route conditions, such as obstacles and the bridge classifications, and enemy and civilian activity along the route. A route reconnaissance includes not only the route itself, but also all terrain along the route from which the enemy could influence friendly forces' maneuver, especially terrain conducive to enemy ambushes. The OIC normally assigns the mission when he wants to use a specific route for friendly movement. Typically, route recon is conducted by platoons and troop-sized elements. Unless the OIC orders otherwise, the unit conducting a route reconnaissance performs specific tasks within the limits of its capabilities. If a unit does not have the time or resource to complete all of these tasks, it must prioritize its mission task to achieve the recon objective or otherwise contact the OIC for further guidance. If after starting the reconnaissance, the unit determines that it cannot complete an assigned task, such as clearing the enemy or reducing obstacles to create lanes as required to support the maneuver of the main body along the route, it must report and await further instructions. Now, there are certain tasks that are typical in a route reconnaissance mission. These include 1. Finding, reporting, and clearing all enemy forces from the route and nearby terrain that can influence movement along the route in question. 2. Determine the trafficability of the route. In other words, can the route handle the movement of the friendly force that intends to use it? 3. Reconnoiter all terrain that the enemy may use to control movement along the route, including canalizing terrain, choke points, potential ambush sites, landing zones, and drop zones. 4th, reconnoiter all urban areas and lateral routes along the route at issue. 5th, evaluate all bridges, overpasses, underpasses, and culverts along the route at issue. 6th, locate all fords, crossing points, and bypasses for existing and reinforcing obstacles along the route. Seventh, locate obstacles and create lanes around them as specified in the recon unit's orders. And finally, eighth, timely report all of this information to the parent unit. Essentially, the unit performing a route recon must establish that the route in question is free from enemy contact and is suitable for use by the parent unit. So then next we've got zone recon. Zone reconnaissance is a form of reconnaissance that involves a directed effort to obtain detailed information on all routes, obstacles, terrain, and enemy forces within a zone defined by boundaries. Obstacles include both existing and reinforcing. The OIC assigns a zone reconnaissance mission when he needs additional information on a zone before committing other forces to that zone. It is an appropriate method of recon when the enemy situation is vague, existing knowledge of the terrain is limited, or combat operations have altered the terrain in question. A zone reconnaissance may include several route or area reconnaissance missions assigned to subordinate units. Unlike route reconnaissance, and depending on the size of the zone being reconnoitered, zone recon is performed from platoon all the way up to brigade-sized elements. Because of its size, zone reconnaissance is normally a deliberate, time-consuming process. It takes more time than any other reconnaissance mission, so the OIC must allow adequate time to conduct it. Zone reconnaissance is normally conducted over an extended distance. Zone recon requires all ground elements executing it to be employed abreast of each other. When the reconnaissance objective is an enemy force, the OIC may forego a detailed reconnaissance of the zone and focus its assets on the named areas of interest, or NAI, as designated in the recon order that would reveal enemy dispositions and intentions. A reconnaissance unit can never disregard terrain when focusing on the enemy. However, it minimizes its terrain reconnaissance to that which may influence a named area of interest. We'll talk about named areas of interest in future episodes of this podcast when we get into operational planning and control measures. As with the route recon, there are certain tasks that are typical in a zone reconnaissance mission. These include 1. Find and report all enemy forces within the zone. 2. Clear all enemy forces in the zone that is within the capability of the unit conducting the reconnaissance. 3rd, determine the trafficability of all terrain within the zone, including all built-up areas. 4th, locate and determine the extent of all contaminated areas of the zone. This task really only applies when the event rules provide for contamination by chemical, nuclear, or biological agents, as simulated. 5th, where applicable, evaluate and classify all bridges, defiles, overpasses, underpasses, and culverts in the zone. 6th, locate any fords, crossing sites, or bypasses for existing and reinforcing obstacles, including built-up areas in the zone. 7th, locate all obstacles and create lanes as specified in the order. And finally, 8th, as always, report the information gathered from these tasks to the OIC directing the zone reconnaissance. So now we've gotten to area reconnaissance. Area reconnaissance is a form of reconnaissance that focuses on obtaining detailed information about the terrain or enemy activity within a prescribed area. This area may include a town, a ridgeline, woods, an airhead, or any other feature critical to operations. The area may consist of a single point, such as a bridge or installation, or could be larger. Areas are normally smaller than zones and are not usually contiguous to other friendly areas targeted for reconnaissance. Because the area is smaller, an area reconnaissance moves faster than a zone reconnaissance. Like zone recon, and depending on the size of the area being reconnoitered, area recon can be performed from platoon-sized all the way up to brigade-sized elements. Similarly, the tasks for area reconnaissance are essentially the same as those for the zone reconnaissance. So let's talk about reconnaissance in force. A reconnaissance in force is a deliberate combat operation designed to discover or test the enemy's strength, dispositions, and reactions, or to obtain other information. Battalion-sized task forces or larger organizations usually conduct a reconnaissance in force mission. The OIC assigns a reconnaissance in force mission when the enemy is known to be operating within an area and the OIC cannot obtain adequate intelligence by any other means. A unit may also conduct a reconnaissance in force mission in restrictive type terrain where the enemy is likely to ambush smaller reconnaissance forces. A reconnaissance in force is an aggressive reconnaissance conducted as an offensive operation with clearly stated reconnaissance objectives. The overall goal of a reconnaissance in force is to determine enemy weaknesses that can be later exploited. It differs from other reconnaissance operations in that it is normally conducted only to gain information about the enemy and not about the terrain. While specially trained and equipped units usually conduct other forms of reconnaissance operations, any maneuver force can conduct a reconnaissance in force. Although a unit conducting a reconnaissance in force is organized as if it is conducting offensive operations, the lack of information regarding the enemy dictates that the unit be large and strong enough to develop the situation, protect the force, cause the enemy to react, and put the enemy at some risk, usually at the same time. The less that is known about the enemy, the stronger the force conducting the reconnaissance force must be. Because of the lack of information about the enemy, the OIC normally conducts reconnaissance in force as a movement to contact or a series of frontal attacks across a broad front. The tasks assigned to a unit conducting a reconnaissance by force mission differ from those conducting area, zone, or route reconnaissance. These include 1. Penetrating the enemy's security area including the screen, cover, and guard elements to determine its size and depth. 2. Determining the location and disposition of enemy main positions. 3. Attacking enemy main positions and attempting to cause the enemy to react by using local reserves or major counterattack forces, employing fire support assets, adjusting positions, and/or employing specific weapon systems. And then finally, 4. Determining weaknesses in the enemy's dispositions to exploit later. The point of the reconnaissance by force mission is to determine weaknesses in the enemy, including gaps in its security, positioning of enemy positions that would facilitate a flanking attack against them, and weaknesses in enemy command and control. Now that we have talked about the types of reconnaissance, let's discuss methods in which they can be accomplished. To reduce their vulnerability on the Milsim battlefield, recon elements use recon methods that achieve a level of acceptable risk and security necessary to make mission. Often this is expressed in a trade-off between speed and security. The faster the unit conducts recon, the more risk the unit accepts, and the less detail the recon will reveal. The contrary is also true. The slower the unit conducts recon, the more stealthy it is likely to be, and the more detailed information that the recon will produce. However, the slower the unit conducts recon, the more slowly that information will be provided to the parent unit. So each recon element conducts its mission somewhere between aggressive and stealthy as METC requires. In case you have forgotten, METC stands for the elements of mission planning: mission, enemy, terrain, troops, friendly that is, time, and civilian considerations. Now, the first method of conducting recon is aggressive. Aggressive reconnaissance emphasizes rapid identification of the enemy's combat power by fighting for information. It is characterized by the employment of armored vehicles and the use of supporting fires. Scout platoon leaders must always remain aware that aggressive information gathering can provide the enemy with an indication of friendly capabilities and future intentions. In Milsim operations, aggressive recon is typically performed by one or more technicals and/or their dismounts. The second method of conducting reconnaissance is stealth. Stealthy reconnaissance is a time-consuming process that emphasizes avoiding detection by the enemy. To be effective, a stealthy approach must rely on dismounted reconnaissance assets and the maximum use of covered and concealed terrain. In Milsim, stealthy recon is often conducted by spotter teams and sniper observer teams. Now, another method of conducting recon is the use of reconnaissance patrols. These patrols are often conducted at the squad or platoon level. Dismounted reconnaissance patrols are often employed when detailed recon and stealth are required. Enemy contact is expected, restrictive terrain is encountered, time is not a significant factor, and security is a primary concern. Listen to episode 11 for details on conducting reconnaissance patrols. And then we also have observation post. When terrain allows it, establish observation post on high ground. This allows a surveillance and observation team to maintain surveillance over a large area without having to be constantly on the move. Such observation posts need to be in contact with command and control. Then the next method is mounted recon. In Milsim operations, leaders will often task technical and their dismounts with conducting reconnaissance. Mounted recon is typically utilized when time is limited, where detailed recon is not required, where intelligence preparation of the battlefield is accurate, and where the terrain being reconnoitered is open. Another method of conducting reconnaissance is also aerial reconnaissance. In Milsim, this kind of reconnaissance is conducted by air assets such as drones and helicopters. Aerial recon is the fastest form of reconnaissance, but it has limitations. It can be limited by weather as well as camouflage of the area being reconnoitered. And then we've got the final method of conducting recon, which is recon by fire. In reconnaissance by fire, recon elements place direct and or indirect fire on positions where there is a reasonable suspicion of enemy occupation. The goal is to cause the enemy to disclose its presence by moving or by returning fire. Recon elements use this reconnaissance method when enemy contact is expected and time is limited, or when the scouts cannot maneuver to develop the situation. For example, reconnaissance by fire may be employed when the recon element detects an obvious kill zone, when the recon element is in contact with a natural or man-made obstacle, when the recon element locates a suspected enemy position that fits within intelligence that is already known, where the recon element discovers signs of recent activity such as footprints or vehicle tracks, and or where the recon element discovers evidence of a bunker complex. At this point, I'd like to touch again on the additional guidance an OIC can provide to a recon asset, in addition to designating a recon objective. Such additional guidance by the OIC includes focus, tempo, and engagement criteria. This additional guidance is an extension of the OIC's commander's intent. So let's talk about focus first. Focus is the expression of about what types of information the OIC is most concerned about. The OIC's focus for reconnaissance usually falls into three general areas: Commander's Critical Information Requirements, or CCIR, targeting, and voids in information. CCIR is information requirements provided by the OIC which illustrate the information he needs in order to make timely and effective decisions. The commander's focus allows reconnaissance to prioritize taskings and narrow their scope of operations. An operation may have a terrain focus where status of routes, bridges, and obstacles are more important than the enemy. Conversely, the operation may focus on enemy where locating its security zone, main body, and reserves are essential. Additionally, OICs may express their focus in terms of reconnaissance push and pull. Recon push is used when the OIC is committed to a particular course of action or maneuver option. The commander pushes his recon assets forward as necessary to gain greater visibility on specific named areas of interest to confirm or deny the assumption on which his course of action is based. Information gathered during the reconnaissance push is used to confirm and finalize the OIC's plan. Think of it this way. Recon push is when the OIC pushes his recon assets out from the unit's main body in an effort to confirm his assumptions and previously made decisions. Recon pull is used when the enemy's situation is not well known or the situation is rapidly changing. Reconnaissance pull promotes planning and decision-making based on changing assumptions into confirmed information. Initial assumptions and the CCIR are used to deploy reconnaissance assets early to collect information for use in the development of courses of action. The OIC uses recon assets to confirm or deny initial CCIRs prior to the decision on a course of action or maneuver option, thus pulling the unit to the decisive point on the battlefield. Success in the reconnaissance pull requires an integrated reconnaissance plan that can be executed prior to the OIC having to make a course of action decision. With a recon pull, the OIC sends his recon assets out ahead of the unit to provide information which he can utilize to form an effective course of action that can be subsequently enacted. In essence, the information provided by a recon asset pulls the main body of the unit into a position where it can have decisive effects on the enemy. So let's talk about tempo then. The OIC establishes the time requirements he envisions for the reconnaissance force and expresses them in a statement that describes the degree of completeness, covertness, and potential of engagement he is willing to accept. The following terms describe the OIC's use of control and momentum of reconnaissance operations. The first one is deliberate. Deliberate operations are slow, detailed, and broad-based. They require the accomplishment of numerous tasks. This is a description of the degree of completeness required by the OIC. Significant time must be allowed to conduct a deliberate reconnaissance. The second one is rapid. Rapid operations are fast-paced, focused on key pieces of information, and entail a small number of tasks. This is a description of the degree of completeness required by the OIC. It describes reconnaissance operations that must be performed in a time-constrained environment. The third one is stealthy. Stealthy operations are conducted to minimize chance contact and prevent the reconnaissance force from being detected. They are often conducted dismounted and require increased allocation of time for success. This is a description of the level of covertness required by the OIC. Then we have forceful. Forceful operations are conducted without significant concern about being observed. They are often conducted mounted or by combat units serving in a reconnaissance role. It is also appropriate in a stability or support operation where the threat is not significant in relationship to the requirement for information. This is a description of the level of covertness required by the OIC. Next, we have aggressive. Aggressive operations have very permissive engagement criteria and allow the reconnaissance unit leader to engage in combat to make mission. This is a description of the potential for engagement. Then we have discrete. Discrete operations have very restrictive engagement criteria and restrain the reconnaissance forces from initiating combat to gain information. This is a description of the potential for engagement. Then finally, we have engagement criteria. The OIC establishes what enemy forces he expects reconnaissance forces to engage and with what level of force. This decision assists the reconnaissance leadership in planning direct and indirect fires and establishing bypass criteria. It is particularly important when the reconnaissance force is augmented with combat systems to conduct reconnaissance in force or security operations. The meaning of all this reconnaissance is the effort to gather information or see what the enemy is doing and to evaluate terrain to see if it favors the enemy or you. It's the fight to see through the fog of war for an advantage of situational awareness that can be brought to bear on the enemy. Are you seeing a pattern here? This all goes back to gaining and maintaining situational awareness. So now that we have talked about reconnaissance operations, let's talk about its opposite, security operations. Security is the flip side of reconnaissance. Security is actions taken to preserve the unit from surprise attack and or to prevent the enemy from gaining information that would help him maintain situational awareness and or gain the initiative. Whereas reconnaissance is focused on the enemy force or terrain, security's emphasis is on the protection of friendly forces. Security operations are conducted by a unit to provide it with some early and accurate warning of the enemy operations. The objective of security operations is to provide the unit with reaction time, maneuver space, and protection to the force. These operations can be conducted anywhere in relation to the unit's main body, including its front, rear, and flanks. So there are 5 fundamentals to security operations. The first one is to provide early and accurate warning. This is one of the overriding fundamentals of security operations. You want to place your security assets far enough away from the main body of the parent unit so that they can provide early warning. However, and with the exception of a cover unit, the security element needs to remain within indirect fire range of the parent unit. This will help a screen or guard force to break contact if necessary. Second, provide reaction time and maneuver space. This is one of the more challenging aspects of security fundamentals to achieve. The security element needs to be as far from the parent unit main body as tactically feasible. Doing so provides the security element with more reaction time and space to maneuver and to avoid decisive contact with the enemy. Then third, orient on the force or facility to be secured. Security forces must always understand that their mission is tied directly to the security of the main body of the parent unit, or in the case of area security, a specific location or geographic objective. Then fourth, perform continuous reconnaissance. Finding enemy threats is central to providing the main body of the parent unit with early warning. The security elements must continuously conduct reconnaissance to locate enemy forces that pose a threat to the main unit. And then finally 5, maintain enemy contact. Once the security element makes contact with the enemy, it must maintain contact with it in order to achieve its mission. Such contact does not have to be physical. Visual contact with the enemy is sufficient so long as it is maintained continuously. Now, there are 5 types of security operations. They are the screen, guard, cover, area security, and local security. With area security, the unit positions forces so as to protect a critical area such as a command post, towed artillery battery, tactical operations center, terrain objectives, and the like. In contrast, local security is security that an individual unit uses to protect itself from surprise attack. It is sometimes referred to as 360-degree security, rear security, or unit security, depending on the extent of security used at any given time by the unit. Now, the screen, guard, and cover security operations are mostly employed at the operational level to protect a given unit's front, flanks, or rear from enemy observation or contact. Each one of these operations have differing missions and dispositions. So let's talk about the screen first. The purpose of the screen is to position forces so that they may provide early and accurate warning to the unit's main body. In relation to guard and cover, a screen is smaller and maintains less firepower. Because of this, you do not want your screen to get decisively engaged with enemy forces. You want it to simply do its mission of providing early and accurate warning to the main body of the unit before breaking contact. In a guard mission, the force is ramping up in both manpower and firepower. A guard force continues to provide early and accurate early warning to the main body. However, and in addition, the guard force is further tasked with engaging the enemy in an effort to protect the main body of the unit and buy some time to disengage. The guard achieves this mission by preventing the enemy from observing the main body and by not allowing the enemy to place direct fire against the unit main body. As part of this mission, the guard force may conduct reconnaissance, conduct offensive operations, form a defense, or conduct a delaying action. Because it does not have any organic artillery of its own, a guarding force must conduct operations within the range of the parent unit's indirect fire weapons. A guard force differs from a screen in several aspects. First, a guard force possesses far more combat power than a screen. Consequently, it is equipped with enough firepower so it can fix, repel, and even defeat lead elements of an enemy force so it can't engage the main body of the parent unit with direct fires. Second, a guard force will usually be positioned on a more narrow front than that of a screen force. Thus, in a guard force, vehicles will have less dispersion than in a screen. This enables the guard force to concentrate combat power if it is required to fix, repel, or defeat the enemy. Third, because of its mission, a guard force will engage the enemy with both its own direct fires and generally the parent unit's indirect fires. Remember, as with the screen force, a guard force will operate within range of the main body's indirect fires. A screen avoids engaging the enemy with direct fires unless absolutely necessary. A guard force is equipped and prepared to conduct such a direct fire engagement. And then finally, we come to the cover force. The cover force is a step up from the guard. As with the screen and the guard, a cover force provides early and accurate early warning and protects the main body of the parent unit. A cover unit will also conduct all the mission tasks of the guard unit, including conducting reconnaissance, offensive operation, defensive operations, and delaying operations in an effort to protect the main body of the parent unit from observation and/or direct fires. The main difference between a guard and a cover force is that a covering force can operate beyond the range of the main unit's indirect fire weapons. A unit conducting a cover mission will possess everything they require to operate independently, including indirect fires. Now, a cover force differs from a guard force in several respects. First, the unit assigned as a cover force is self-contained. As a result, a cover force can operate a significant distance away from the main body. Because it maintains its own organic indirect fire support, a cover force can conduct operations independently from its parent unit. Because it can operate away from the main body, it can clearly develop the situation for the main body far earlier than the screen or the guard. Second, a cover unit will likely possess much more combat power than a unit executing a guard or screen mission. This combat power provides the cover unit with great flexibility in conducting and achieving its mission. Third, because of its combat power and support elements, a cover element can and sometimes will desire to become decisively engaged with the enemy. And then fourth, a cover force will almost always be assigned an enemy-oriented operation or task as opposed to a train-oriented operation. Now, although we could deep dive on all the aspects of guard, screen, and cover missions, they would likely take up episodes of their own. As such, I will likely go into more detail on the guard and cover mission in a future episode once we get into operational planning. Now, next week, we're going to discuss how to effectively use smoke on the battlefield. If you have any topics you would like to see covered in future episodes of Tactical Tuesday, please let us know by posting it on the Modern Milsim Facebook page. If it's not one of the topics we are already planning to cover, we will likely add it to our ever-growing topic list. If you like this podcast, please subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, as well as many other podcast directories. As always, thank you for your support, and I'll see you in our next episode. See you then. To our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to providing you with new episodes every 2 weeks. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast, please subscribe and provide us with a review. We want to know what you like and how we can improve. You can also contact us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Modern Milsim with any suggestions you may have. In our next episode of Tactical Tuesday, we will discuss how to effectively use smoke on the Milsim battlefield. If you want to know more about application of real-world tactics, techniques, and procedures to Milsim, please check out From Alpha to Omega, a Milsim tactical primer and training manual, as well as From Insertion to Extraction, Advanced Milsim CQB Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures. Both books are available at Amazon.com. As always, thank you for your support, and I'll see you at our next installment of Tactical Tuesday.